Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
Although I knew her work, I didn't know her.
Moving the numbers into clinical practice, that's what we get the most excitement.
As artists, we depend on the human connection.
Today on Spotlight, a book about Missouri's earliest known artist, her life, and what she teaches us about Missouri. Plus, an art exhibit celebrating all of her work, the history of St. Louis as seen through her sketches. And then the relationship between COVID and dementia, the MU researchers connecting the dots. But first, St. Louis's first actors, the history of local theater. It's Sunday, and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
St. Louis has a long and storied history of live theater. But where did it all begin? Through the 2022 Give STL Day fundraiser, the Missouri Historical Society sought to preserve artifacts from the earliest days of St. Louis theater and tell the story of the man who was determined to establish professional theater in the city.
Noah Miller Ludlow was a New York-born actor, producer, and theater manager who, along with his longtime business partner, Saul Smith, dominated the theater scene in St. Louis, New Orleans, and Mobile, Alabama in the mid-1800s. Before he came to St. Louis, he was an actor, he was in traveling theater companies. He always loved the theater, but knew that he wanted to go west of the Mississippi to try to establish drama in other parts of the country. Noah was introduced to a St. Louis newspaper publisher who told him that St. Louis, even though it was such a small town in 1819, it was lacking for entertainment and that the people really wanted theater. And so he made up his mind that he was going to travel there and establish the first permanent professional acting company.
Despite objections from his friends and colleagues, Ludlow came to St. Louis in 1819. However, the next few years were filled with hardships and tragedies.
He established the Old Salt House Theater when he was first in St. Louis. He had a lot of trouble heating that first theater. And so it actually got so bad that at one point his wife, who was performing in one of the shows, fainted on stage and had to be brought home. Eventually, another theater company moved into town, and he said they were more experienced and just did a better job. So he was only able to do that first season back in 1819. He was bouncing around from city to city, performing depending on where he was. He would write about all of the tragedies of the day. So yellow fever would sweep through Mobile, and the next year his theater there burned down and he lost his scenery, props, costumes, everything.
In the 1830s, Ludlow would return to St. Louis and try one more time to follow his old dream. With better funding, Ludlow opened the St. Louis Theater in 1837.
The St. Louis Theater was very popular overall, especially the first several seasons did really, really well, and St. Louisans flocked to this new entertainment.
Many of the country's most popular actors also flocked to the St. Louis Theater.
A big one was Julia Dean, who performed in the 1840s. We also know that Junius Brutus Booth performed there. He was a major tragedian of the day, and he's also the father of John Wilkes Booth. The St. Louis Theater had its final season in 1851, and after that the building was sold to the federal government. But another theater opened up right nearby, so the tradition continued immediately. As far as Ludlow's story, he continued to be in the theater world for decades, and in 1880 he wrote a book that was part biography and part accounting of how theater came to the West and the South of the U.S. The Missouri Historical Society has a jacket and pair of trousers as well as a wig that were worn by Ludlow in 1837 after the St. Louis Theater first opened. He was performing the character of Dr. Pangloss in a comedy called An Heir at Law. So we have the costume that he wore right after the theater opened. We also have a book of his that was of Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies with an inscription in it when he passed it along to one of his sons. The funds that are going toward these pieces, the costume and the wig, will help us stabilize and clean them so that they can get the conservation care that they need in order to be around for years to come.
Scan the QR code on your screen to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You might not know her name, but if you visited the Missouri History Museum, you've probably seen her work.
When I first took the position at the Missouri Historical Society, Anna Maria's was one of the first names that I really became familiar with because we used selections from her artwork so often in our other exhibitions to illustrate articles because it truly gives a one-of-a-kind look at early St. Louis. But what I came to realize is that although I knew her work, I didn't know her.
In her new book, More Than Ordinary, early St. Louis artist Anna Maria von Pfuhl, senior curator Hattie Felton changes that for all of us by delving into the life, times, and catalog of Missouri's first known female artist. Felton says that when von Pfuhl began visiting and then moved to the Missouri Territory in the early 1800s, St. Louis was a city on the verge, a confluence of diverse peoples and cultures. Lucky for us, Anna Maria von Pfuhl was determined to capture it.
She would have been sitting there with her sketchbook, sitting there with her watercolors, doing these lovely hasty little sketches of the street scenes and the landscapes around her, and I don't think anyone would have thought anything of it until today, when we can really look back and say, wow, she left us with a gift.
Working as a curator, you're used to a certain way of how things are presented, and you can impart your creativity within it, but then to take it to a whole nother level or realm with a book must have been really cool.
Absolutely. We have an incredible collection at the Missouri Historical Society. It is almost 170,000 artifacts strong. And what that means is that for a lot of our collection, especially our art collection, many pieces are not seen. They don't always get the chance to go on exhibit. And even when they do, for a collection like hers, there's more than 130 pieces in the collection. There is no way we could include each one of them.
Who was Anna Maria?
Anna Maria was a woman who used art to connect with the world around her. As a young woman growing up at the end of the 1700s, early 1800s, she did not have access to the same type of opportunities that was available to other artists, especially to male artists. And that did not stop her. She really left a well-documented legacy of decades of artistic productivity. And I think that's because whether she could make it as a professional artist or not, it was who she was. She was an artist, and she was someone who really connected with others through that artistic expression.
To find out why her obituary stood out, watch the full interview at hecmedia.org. You can also view her work in a new exhibit at the Missouri History Museum.
We are in the Missouri History Museum, located in Forest Park, and we are standing in our small gallery space where we have a show celebrating the life and work of Anna Maria von Pfuhl, Missouri's earliest known woman artist. So Anna Maria's work is a treasure trove of insight into what St. Louis looked like and what the people of St. Louis were like in the early 19th century. Anna Maria's early work started off copying paintings and prints of Europe, and a lot of her early scenes were very formally inspired and are reminiscent of what you might see in an art museum or an art gallery that features works from that time period. But what's so unique about this collection is that we have dozens and dozens of pieces that are unique in their style. They are really Anna Maria's own. Anna Maria came to St. Louis and brought her sketchbooks with her in 1818, and she stayed here for several months. And during her time in St. Louis, she depicted everything she saw. She created beautiful watercolor landscapes of the river, of the indigenous earthworks, of the caves, and she also stopped to sketch the people that she encountered on the streets of St. Louis. So the men and women going about their daily chores, children playing, the domestic scenes that she was in the midst of. And they are very intimate many times. They are images that you just won't find elsewhere of daily life and the happenings that were going on in the early 19th century. So it is an incredibly rich body of work that is an immersive artistic lens on early St. Louis. So for the Missouri Historical Society, this collection of artwork and Anna Maria's story have always been incredibly important ever since they were donated to us back in the 1950s. They have been featured in exhibitions, in publications, in articles. But what we came to realize was that we had been using her artwork to tell St. Louis's story, to tell bits and pieces of her own story, but we had never looked at that collection in full and explored her life in its entirety. And I was thrilled to have the opportunity to pursue a catalog of her work and this exhibition, to put that into the spotlight. We really wanted to look at the collection together to see what it could tell us about the lives of women artists working in this fascinating time period, about this transitional moment in St. Louis's history. And when you bring her artwork together in one place, you really start to see a fuller picture. And for us, this was a way to do justice to Anna Maria's story by looking at her artwork in a bigger way and being able to share that with the public. If you are interested in the early history of St. Louis and in the life and work of this incredible woman artist, I encourage you to visit the Missouri History Museum to see Painting Creole St. Louis on exhibition through January of 2023. And for more information on this and our other exhibitions and programs, you can visit mohistory.org.
You just never know where that spark is going to come from.
You're putting a human touch to everything through the vehicle of art. We give them the ability to hope.
Across the globe, more than 400 million people survived COVID-19, but for some, there are long-term effects. Dr. Adnan Qureshi is a professor of clinical neurology at the University of Missouri School of Medicine. He became interested in particular complaints.
They cannot function at the same level. They're actually having difficulties in memory. They're having lapses in memory. They're having difficulty in mental processing of intellectual tasks.
Now, this team of University of Missouri researchers show a link between COVID-19 and an increased risk of dementia. The researchers found that patients hospitalized with pneumonia associated with COVID-19 may be at risk for dementia.
Mental processing is slow, is impaired, and they just can't function at the same level as they were able to do before the infection.
To get answers, Qureshi teamed up with researchers from the MU College of Engineering and the Institute for Data Science and Informatics to analyze data from more than 110 healthcare facilities in the U.S.
By looking at this kind of large-scale patients' data set, The data analytics is going to help us to connect the dots, to really look at what could be potential issues for some certain population of the patients. They might later develop dementia.
Out of the more than 10,000 patients with pneumonia associated with COVID-19, 312 people, or 3%, developed new onset dementia. This typically happened within 6 months of the pneumonia diagnosis.
For computational approach or artificial intelligence approach, we look at COVID-19, what could be the potential impact for patients, and then how we use AI methods to really quickly hash through the potential groups, subgroups, and the potential associations we have here. Then that's what the computer can do for us.
The results from the data analysis show that while developing dementia after pneumonia is rare, the odds are 30% higher among patients with pneumonia associated with COVID-19 compared to other pneumonias.
So that actually suggests that it's not just the pneumonia, there's something unique about COVID-19 or the SARS-CoV-2 infection.
He says further studies over time would provide more insights into why COVID-19 may increase dementia risk, and patients who are 70 years old and older have the greatest increased risk of dementia.
SARS-CoV-2 infection actually results in a lot of inflammation in the body, and these inflammatory markers actually are able to cross into the brain. And what we are seeing as a consequence of these excessive inflammatory markers circulating in the blood, entering the brain, and then subsequently causing brain damage. And the dementia is simply a consequence of this brain damage.
Meanwhile, the researchers hope this new information can be used to develop tailored treatments or screenings for the patients who are most at risk, an idea known as precision medicine.
Numbers and data are the new currency, right? And with those numbers, they are just publications, they are just some report. But by moving the numbers into the clinical practice, I think that's what we get the most excitement. Like to how to utilize the numbers we discover and apply that to the bedside. That's what we are looking for.
Do you have students interested in medicine? A future doctor in the house, maybe? Then send them inside the lab and inside the operating room with videos from Educate.today. Use the keyword medicine.
Looking for videos to use in homeschool, classroom, or hybrid learning settings? Need them aligned to standards, lesson plans, or activity ideas? We've got them at Educate.today.
Earlier this summer, the Regional Arts Commission of St. Louis proudly announced that funding was back for local artists after a nearly 2-year hiatus.
More than $1.15 million in new grant funding for local artists, arts programming across the region.
In March of 2020, not only did we launch our strategic plan, but it was the beginning of the pandemic. RAC receives 98% of its revenue from hotel motel sales tax. So in 2019, we had nearly $7 million of hotel motel revenue. By April of 2020, we were down to $2 million. So we lost significant revenue in a short amount of time. And what we've done over the last 2 years is just slowly rebuild RAC. When you go from $7 million to $2 million, 16 team members to 4 team members, it's a pretty significant change. And so each year, as we've been able to recover resources, we've hired people back to RAC, and we've really focused on ensuring that we can strengthen our organizational infrastructure and provide the grants that our arts community desperately needs. We are more efficient and effective, and we're focused on the end user. We're focused on our grantees and making sure that our services meet their needs today. We don't depend on things that we used to do. We want to address the needs of our grantees so that it's relevant and resonant. we can adjust, we can be flexible with our process to meet the needs of artists and arts organizations. We took that learning into this current grant cycle. We shortened the application. We don't ask questions that we don't need the answer to. We don't ask questions where we're not going to use the data, because we know our arts organizations are struggling to keep their programs going, and spending time on a 13-page application keeps them from doing the work that they need to do. That applies to our working artists. The other thing that we did was we did not require matching grants, which for many years was a requirement for people to get RAC funding, because we didn't want to be the only source of revenue. But now several of our standard or well-known sources of funding are challenged as well, and so we wanted to make sure we could get resources to our grantees as quickly as possible and efficiently, but also ensuring accountability.
As artists, we depend on the human connection. And when that has been taken away from you, you're wondering, how do I connect? And so now things are starting to open up again and bloom again, and people are so hungry. Right here in St. Louis, artists are just hungry to be able to come and see a show now. So I will be doing a production/exhibit at the Grandel Theater in Grandel Square. Being able to have this performance and see the human connection return again. We may not be able to do everything that we used to do, but at least I can be in the same room with someone and hear them laugh. It's going to be wonderful to see RAC bring life again back into St. Louis.
Our arts and culture organizations make St. Louis a great place to live, work, play for both residents and visitors. And my hope is that for RAC in particular, we find new sources of funding to close our gap so that we can fully fund grants to artists and arts organizations. My hope for artists is that they keep creating. I hope that they get more recognition that they deserve, so that we will look 5 years from now and say that it was the arts community that helped make the difference.
Visit racstl.org for more info. Discover hidden gems in Forest Park later on Spotlight.
If you've ever been to Forest Park, chances are you've seen this. But did you ever stop and wonder just what it is and why it's there?
Behind me is the Nathan Frank Bandstand.
The bandstand was built in 1876, the same year Forest Park opened, and was used as a venue for musicians to hold public concerts. It was renovated for the 1904 World's Fair and remained in use for several years after.
Early part of the 1900s, that bandstand, which was made of wood, suffered from both weather, from fires, and in around 1910, 1911, it was actually closed down because it was not thought to be safe.
The site then stood empty. That is, until 1924, when a man by the name of Nathan Frank came along.
Nathan Frank was a prominent St. Louisan. He also was one of the people that helped to bring the World's Fair to St. Louis in 1904.
Nathan Frank was also one of the earliest supporters of Forest Park and one of its earliest benefactors, donating about $50,000 to build the bandstand we see today. This new bandstand is slightly less ornate than the original. It's made of marble rather than wood to cut down on the chances of future fires. And while it's no longer used by musicians, it remains to this day one of the jewels of Forest Park.
You can find the stories featured in today's show along with past episodes and more at hecmedia.org/spotlight.
It has been called the crown jewel of St. Louis, but Forest Park is more like a collection of gems. And author Carolyn Miller has spent the past 2 years taking inventory.
There's something to discover around every corner.
At 1,300 acres, Forest Park is so large, few people have seen it all. But as an avid runner, Carolyn Miller has seen most of it, which is why Reedy Press approached her to create a book of Forest Park walking tours, a pathfinder to curiosities, familiar and obscure.
I think my favorite little gem is the Spanish Cannon. It was actually given to the city of St. Louis by the War Department in 1900. It was forged during the Spanish-American War. And St. Louis didn't have a place to put it. And so they stuck it in the horse stables in Forest Park. And it sat in there until somebody wrote an op-ed in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in the voice of the cannon, kind of complaining about living with these horses and how it needed a place to live. And so in 1901, the city of St. Louis built a little area in Forest Park for the Spanish Cannon to sit.
The book maps out 7 historic tours and 1 nature walk. Many points of interest along those routes are the things visitors see all the time, but have no idea about the story behind them.
I love the visitor center. It used to be a streetcar stop, a streetcar pavilion. The Cabanne House, that's the first brick farmhouse west of the Mississippi.
And then there are the less familiar sites, like the joyful Musicians Memorial, the somber Korean War Memorial, and the baronial Vandeventer Place gates.
These gates were the entrance to a very posh, ritzy St. Louis neighborhood in the late 1800s. And so all that was left of it were these gates, and they moved them to Forest Park so that they wouldn't just disappear. Kind of a weird story, but they are beautiful to look at.
There's a time in each year that we always hold dear, good old summertime.
Most St. Louisans know the 2 remaining permanent structures from the World's Fair are the flight cage at the zoo and the art museum. But the book also points out other ornaments in the park that are part of the fair's legacy.
So many different really classic things in Forest Park were influenced by the World's Fair or purchased with funds from the World's Fair. I'm thinking of the Apotheosis of St. Louis, of course, the sculpture of Thomas Jefferson in the lobby of the History Museum. During the fair, they had a waterfall flowing down Art Hill, and it was called the Cascades. And so after the fair ended, they decided to build a waterfall sort of in tribute to that original waterfall. And that fall is actually the start of the water system in Forest Park.
Well, and on that score, a lot of people probably don't realize, because you can't really see it anymore, that River des Peres runs through Forest Park.
That was my favorite fact that I uncovered, because I had no idea. They channeled it into these giant concrete pipes and pushed it underground so that when the city hosted the World's Fair in 1904, nobody could see it, which I just thought that was a really cool fact.
Like so many St. Louisans, Carolyn Miller feels a personal connection to Forest Park. It's where she met her husband, and like a lot of brides, she used the park as a backdrop for her wedding pictures.
I took some on the bridge to Picnic Island, and I think I was the 3rd bride in line for that bridge, but I took a lot of them in Kennedy Forest, and there were no brides around at all. I did get a lot of birds in my wedding dress, so that was a problem.
The good old summertime.
The history of Forest Park is the history of us, a collection of personal recollections, touchstones, and traditions enjoyed by the generations before us to be enjoyed by the generations that will follow. And now, thanks to Carolyn Miller's hard work, for the rest of us, learning about its treasures is just a walk in the park.
The fact that you can go to Forest Park and see a Monet and a polar bear all in one day for free is just incredible. I mean, I think not a lot of cities can say that. We're just so lucky to have it.
Next week, a mural artist finds a new passion in creating labyrinths. Plus, a St. Louis dressmaker with prominent clients like Mary Todd Lincoln from the 1800s. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.